you everyone for joining us for another Little Lunch webinar. Really delighted to have Kerry Saul with me here from Empire Theatres in Toowoomba. Kerry's the General Manager of the Empire Theatre there, and also involved in the NARPACA committee here in Queensland. It's really great that you could join us, Kerry, and I'm really sort of excited to hear your wealth of experience, and I know you're looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, like heck. Yeah.
So these webinars are designed to offer a little bit of insight into touring around Queensland and touring in general. And so sometimes it's about sort of an update about different opportunities that are coming up, or some professional development opportunities for people who are looking for that. Today we thought we'd sort of focus on two things. One is about providing a little bit of information about what to expect at next year's Queensland Touring Showcase and the road case event that goes with it. And also to tackle the idea of audience demand and what audiences are looking for. And I suppose the fit there is really about saying that as we go into the next showcase phase, starting to think about what presenters are going to be looking for when they're in the room at showcase, and to have a sense of the different pressures, or the different, perhaps pressure is not the right word, but the different elements of consideration that presenters are looking at as they go into the space. So for presenters who are joining us, it might be a chance for you to think about some of those considerations that might not be on your radar at the moment, and to sort of begin to build that into your thinking for next year. And for producers, it's a bit of an opportunity to get some insight from someone who's heavily involved in not just programming at his own venue, but also in that broader network in Queensland through NARPACA, to get a bit of an insight about the types of shows, the types of audiences that are being actively developed, and the type of work that has been successful in doing that. So I might just start with a little bit of an intro about Showcase, because that might just help set the scene a little bit, and then we'll sort of start firing some questions at Kerry. And on that note, I should say that what we'll aim to do is, rather than a scripted speech by Kerry, I'll just be sort of asking some leading questions, and so Kerry can respond to those, and he probably has some other comments he might like to make. If you have questions yourself that are relevant to what we're talking about, please feel free to add them to the chat room as we go, and if I can, I'll interject with those questions. If not, I'll try to save them up for the end. So we'll have about half an hour of talk, and then about 15 minutes at the end to address people's questions that we perhaps haven't covered through the talk. So, as a little bit of a summary of what we're expecting to do with the Queensland Touring Showcase for next year, is we're sort of hoping to move it a little bit more towards a process that serves managed venues. The event itself will be at the Arts Centre at Gold Coast on the 14th and 15th of March next year. The reason that we're moving Showcase back to a model that really talks directly to managed venues is because we want to really spend some time working on the sort of sister project to Showcase, which we affectionately call Roadcase. And Roadcase actually is designed and is tailored for local councils, community presenters, regional festivals, people who have sort of geographic commonality, if you like, or communities of interest, and so that they can actually be making decisions that collectively amongst themselves, in the same way that NARPACA venues and managed venues across Queensland can add that extra benefit of having conversations together too. But the two events will talk to each other, so that Roadcase isn't just a standalone event, neither is Showcase, that we can use the outcomes of Showcase and feed that into the Roadcase process, so that those managed venues, those leaders within the network, within the touring circuit, within Queensland, can actually take that leadership role and actually work with community presenters, with councils and arts councils and regional festivals, etc., to help them make their decisions and to actually create much more viable tours and actually meet the demand of those audiences in those towns as well. So hopefully, I mean, nothing against the sort of big mammoth tours of 50 venue tours, but we're very happy to try and work towards more targeted, more geographically specific tours that might only have 10 or 15 towns, but actually have much richer outcomes because you're actually giving community something that they're looking for, that they can layer into their existing community activity, etc. So these are two events that work next to each other. They're separate but the same. That should really confuse everyone. But I think what we're really trying to do is make sure that every person, or every sort of person represented in our touring network in Queensland, is getting what they need out of the process of developing tours. So, with that said, time to hear from Kerry instead. I thought maybe we could start. Do you want to just explain NARPACA a little bit?
Okay, there's certainly some expert presenters on the webinar this morning, but NARPACA is, I would describe the peak body for arts in Queensland, and it's representing most of the major venues, or all of the major venues in Queensland. We certainly have been around a long time, 31, 32 years, and it is about managed venues and venues that have an ability to present product, I guess, at risk. It was one of the rules of NARPACA that to be a member initially, you had to be able to buy in performances and shows. We certainly see ourselves these days as a slightly different organisation, in that we believe that we've got a great opportunity to further the arts engagement in Queensland.
Great. So you'd be a veteran of going to showcases over the years.
Yeah,
I suppose all of them. And I know the Empire's a very active venue in the circuit, if you like. Perhaps more than you could probably say you're one of the bigger players, if you like, in the touring circuit in Queensland. When you're going into showcase, what are the things that you're looking for?
We've got a wide range of venues. We, obviously our main venue is a rather large one at 1,500 seats. So a lot of the showcase outcomes don't necessarily suit the big venue, but we also now have a 300-seater and a 250. So it does mean that as a presenter, we are quite able to look across quite a wide genre of performance-based activity, and in particular for our region also, because the Toowoomba region is quite large and has a number of other communities. We've tried a couple of times to create a sort of a road case style tour where we've done 5 or 6 shows in our own region within an hour and a half or so of the theatre. So we look pretty hard at everything in that respect. And I know that we certainly try and work with some of our local communities to make sure that they get a bit of something as well.
So sort of actively wearing multiple hats in that space. You're sort of thinking about your own venue, thinking about what the sort of communities in that broader region are looking for, and if there's ways to support
We certainly
them.
try to.
Yeah.
It's not all that easy, but it certainly, and in some ways the organisation, the presenting organisation, has to have a bit of a brief, or at least a statement for themselves that says this is what we actually want to do, that we're not just going to perform in our own room, that we actually make sure that we become a cohesive part of the arts. And with Everything Must Go this year, we really took on from Warwick through to Miles with that particular tour. So it was quite a wide-ranging outcome for us.
And bearing some of the risk in that, I understand
too. Unfortunately.
Well, I think it's really admirable that the Empire's taking that leadership role. I think that's a model that we're really excited to see, and we hope that we can see more of that. I think we're encouraging some of those bigger presenters to see if they can play that role more and more. So that's been fantastic.
I think that's one of the things about trying to do that, and for our presenting organisations within NARPACA, to be able to add 1 or 2 spaces within the region, within each region, actually ends up making a tour a more viable option. And let's face it, the one thing that's missing out of our touring and presenting is easy finance. So we have to be very careful that we can meet our programming objectives and not send our companies broke.
Well, I suppose on that, and just going back to your comments about different venues that you're programming. Well, I mean, what are the considerations that you're taking into, different marketplaces, whether it's Queensland Touring Showcase or those national markets? I mean, beyond just how many seats you're going to need to sell, what are the other sort of elements about your audience that you're really trying to factor in?
Okay, well, for our programming brief really is to provide a wide arts engagement for our community. So we will in particular program loss-making events that don't appear in our community. If our university has a good music program, then we won't try and change up and become a part of that. We look for the large stuff. We're very happy to do the big end with Queensland Ballet and those sort of guys, and to try and meet our community expectation and to promote our Queensland organisations. But the other side of the coin, being able to do some of the smaller events and some of the developmental events, like First World White Girls, for instance, this year, where we're hoping and we're working on trying to create new audience in our smaller spaces that hopefully over the next few years will transfer into the bigger room.
So how do you lead audiences to the stuff that they don't know they want?
That's probably the $1 million question, and I'm sure there's a number of presenters that are listening to this and going, yes, that would be nice to have that answer. And it's the overall consensus, I think, in the arts community is that you actually have to get some engagement, whether it be performance or whether it be community or whether it just be a la QPAC, really getting people onto the precinct so that they can see what's around them. It's a very difficult task, and generally audience development isn't necessarily about a good financial model initially. It's about creating something that, as people go further into the process, that they start to become a regular attendee, and that's really what we're looking for.
So building a familiarity with the space and really, creating the culture of wanting to come back over and over again.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and absolutely. If we can bring people back a second and third time, then that's definitely what we want to try and do.
And so, I suppose I'm curious about the data that you're using to help make your decisions as well. Obviously there's box office information, but is there other data that you're able to collect that help inform your decisions about what shows you program?
We're not very good at that, but we are getting better. The word survey sometimes scares the heck out of a marketing department, and it certainly scares mine. However, that's something that we're working with to go, okay. And a lot of the time it's to find out, our biggest ask is what is the question that we want to ask our current audiences and people that are around us. And we're still learning, we really are. But clearly, the more feedback you get from each event that you do, the more likely you have of decent information to work out where you go forward.
One of the sort of observations we've made after a couple of showcases, and also a couple of years of talking with the producers in particular, is that sort of sometimes that frustration of independent and smaller companies. And how do they get access into some of these programs in these bigger venues, and how do they get on the radar? What's the groundwork that they can do to help sort of, I suppose not just be noticed, but actually sell you what their capability, without necessarily having the big star and the big famous person in it, or having the weight of a state theatre company or state ballet company behind them?
It is a very, very hard question to answer. One of the things that that we find, or I find, is that the theory that somewhere the Anywhere Theatre Festival, and you have a group that starts an independent piece, and they pick up 140 people across their season in the urban area, doesn't necessarily translate in demographic terms to a smaller community. And when you look at a producer who's wanting to come and go west, you know, a small percentage of people in the Brisbane environment or in a large environment creates an audience that's probably sustainable. But when you walk into a city that has 12,000 people like Dalby, the expectation of, you know, 10% of the population, or you know, or even 1% of the population turning up for something they don't know, is a much harder task. And it's, I think, you know, that is the thing that you need to be able to find out what the community is interested in, and especially as the spaces get smaller. For us, you know, we've got a reasonably large demographic, but we still have those issues with some of our commercial hirers who think that just because we've got a big room, it will fill. You know, there's an expectation that the Gold Coast and Jupiter's casino, where you can pull on 1.5 million, will get the same audience in Toowoomba that pulls on 100,000. So there are things that do. For an independent producer, that's the task. It's being able to say, I've got a show that will help you develop your audience in this particular area, and it has to be. It still has to have some decent outcomes for it. You know.
So what's the groundwork you would expect from an independent, for example, to get to that point for you to sort of think about? How would they prove that they have the capacity to do that?
I think one, they've got to present somewhere. We're not really working with independent work. Well, I mean, we do, but we don't regard that as stuff that we're looking for to build. Well, we are building an audience, but we run an independent series, so that's perhaps not what we would bring into the city, because we're trying to create that for ourselves. But for those style of events that are looking at a small to medium audience, you know, and a small to medium venue like what our church, which holds 250, and the Armitage Centre 300, that those sort of events need to be professional. They need to have a decent marketing collateral. There's no point just turning up with a little piece of paper that says this is what we're going to do. And if they've often what I look for is a relatively a reasonable piece of footage for me to help to make a decision on the show. And I mean, I think that's becoming much more common when a producer is starting to put a piece together, that they'll actually record something. And for me, it gives a bit of an idea of what that piece is going to look like, and it tells a lot more story than just being told about it.
Yeah, sure. I just had a thought, and then now it's run out of my brain. Excuse me, Kerry. I just
That's all right.
lost my
well, you know, like I wrote here, how do you get noticed by presenters? I guess that's where we were talking. You know, you still have to make contact, and there's certainly plenty of places as a producer that you can start to engage with presenters in many ways, and Showcase is just one of them. But you know, Metro Arts and Red Chair in Brisbane are both really producing agents in some ways. Regional Arts Victoria, Critical Stages, on our National Touring Selector, which is up at the moment. The Performing Arts Exchange, when we start to get into national stuff. But all of those will provide for state-based outcomes as well. And certainly we've done quite a lot of work with Regional Arts Victoria over the last few years with shows that have come to us and still been funded through the Playing Queensland process. But they're shows that have started and perhaps done Victorian tours and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, as a producer, there are places that you can talk to. I know that with the Playing Queensland round at the moment, we're, you know, Madotti in Vegas, and I think Super Girly, and what's the other one?
Flamenco Fires.
Yeah, 3 or 4 of them have been assisted by some of the producing agents to make sure that they've actually got enough information and enough marketing kit and collateral and advice to be able to do a good presentation and get a tour together.
Well, I remembered what I was going to ask, and I suppose I'm curious, do you think regional audiences have different tastes to metropolitan audiences?
Probably not, but I think that goes back to the demographic. I think, you know, we were talking about it the other day. Running the Glitter Festival on the Gold Coast would be a different experience to running it in Toowoomba, just on numbers, just purely on numbers, because that doesn't mean that that culture isn't existing. It just doesn't have the numbers.
Yeah.
So I think the answer would be no. I don't think there is a difference, but the difference would probably be in the actual outcome. And I think, you know, you go back to what the community wants. If we're looking at something like a town like Mulmerran, which has got a great arts council, and they're very active, you do need to present, or those guys present stuff that they know that their audience, that the current audience they have, is going to come to. Because, you know, most of those organisations, the community organisations regionally, don't have the money to take the risks, let's say, about audience that perhaps our managed venues might have.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And sorry, this one probably we haven't really talked about previous to this, but you know, how much do you use? How much do your program feed into other activities that happen in your community? So, for example, when there are festivals like Carnival of Flowers, how much collaboration is there in terms of, you know, crossover of audiences and working together to develop audiences together? Is there very much of that work happening in your
in our community? No. That's the short answer, really. We have events that are in the Carnival program, but they're not necessarily, they're not co-presented, they're not co-curated. I've certainly provided options. In fact, this year we had Trash Test Dummies in September, and that was something that I'd told Mel about, who was putting the show together, that I'd seen and felt that they would be quite useful. So we do work together, but we don't curate together. And we do keep a bit of an eye out around that long weekend when the carnival's running in the city, to make sure that even though we'll have stuff on that's competing, it's not really competing in the same genre. But you know, at a festival level, I think that's regionally, that's a great place that risks can be taken, because a festival allows you to have 2 or 3 main events and a couple of peripherals that give a community a bit of a look at some of the things that might not otherwise make it to the community.
In terms of NARPACA, I'm just keen to get a sense of how much the different NARPACA venues talk to each other throughout the year, and how much of that decision-making process is collaborative at that level.
We do talk, but probably not as well as we could as a full group, and certainly I have more contact with the venues that are close to me, and we do have a bit of a discussion, and I do hope that, you know, we've already been talking about, you know, God forbid the name Phantom Tours, but about trying to make a really good fist of our ability to communicate, and perhaps our ability to create a decent touring outcome. But you know, each city has its own issues, and each venue has its own sizing issues and things like that. And we know, you know, that Townsville is a very, very busy venue, and they don't have alternate dates. You know, so it's very hard to get in there and program. Even now, cohesively for 216 would be almost impossible. And 217, there are already things in the books for each of our venues.
Well, I think one of the things that we'd like to achieve at Showcase in 2016 is actually to create the space, to create the environment where collectively managed venues at the Gold Coast at Showcase, managed venues have an opportunity to spend some time together, making decisions together, you know, to think about having a clearer sense of what tours look viable before you sort of walk out the doors of the event, and to make that process then of locking that all down a lot quicker. I know that probably you'll hear from us, no doubt, quite a bit over the next couple of months about making sure people are bringing their diaries to Showcase, because we want to get into that conversation about availability sooner, and
I think
doing a deal.
An aspirational goal to actually be able to do that with our presenting organisations, both for Showcase and for Roadcase. It's a lot easier to put something together that has got 4 or 5 people going, yep, we're in here. the corollary to that is that we also need to be able to make sure that if it is a funded process, that the funding process meets its timelines. And because there's no point in the NARPACA venues all getting together and going, yep, we've picked what we want, this is how it's going to work, and find out in 10 or 12 or 15 weeks' time that didn't come to pass. And that's where we lose all our momentum.
That's right, yeah. And I suppose then we'll also look at how we can then take that information and cross it over to Roadcase, and so, you know, supplement that tour, if you like, with a lot more venues and presenters from those sort of rural and remote towns as well. Look, we're about half an hour in.
Really?
It's probably a good time to take a few questions if people are wanting to ask Kerry anything particular, or myself. Feel free just to chuck it into the chat room there, and I'll read them out to Kerry because he's got a different screen to me. So if you'd like to shoot anything through, this would be the time to do it. And so we can do that.
So I know you've said the Roadcase will be in Rockhampton,
Oh yes,
Toowoomba and Hewenden.
He's professional,
So-
this man.
Yeah.
Like me. So Roadcase will be something that we take out to 3 separate towns, and the reason for that is to really go to those communities and get those communities coming together to talk. So yes, we'll be in Rockhampton, we'll be in Toowoomba. So Kerry's hosting us in Toowoomba at the Empire Theatre on the 22nd of March. Then we head up to Rockhampton, where we're being hosted by Pilbian Theatre, and Peter Owens has been very supportive of us there. We'll be there on the 12th of April, so we can skip Easter and get that out of the way. And then we'll be heading to Hewenden, actually, after that on the 19th of April, and having a meeting, a gathering there as well. Roadcases was something that we piloted at the start of this year, and we found it was a really successful way to bring all those sort of different community presenters and people who had different agendas. You know, we had people who were there from a tourism background, we had people there from local councils with community development objectives in mind, and then local arts councils who were there to look at their couple of shows for the year. And what we were noticing is that people from neighbouring regions aren't talking to each other, and they don't really have an opportunity often to come together and have those conversations about how they can work together as a region to create touring circuits. And again, I think it's important to say that Roadcase isn't just for we would love to see managed venues and NARPACA members actually involved in those processes out in those regional towns too. I'm sure Kerry will be in the room at Roadcase in Toowoomba so that he can figure out how he can add value to that process for the different communities from Toowoomba all the way out to Quilpie and beyond, how we can actually work together as a geographic kind of group as well. And I think it's also important to say that it's also about community, sort of communities of interest. So, even though a place like Springsure might be closer to Rockhampton, they may feel more like they identify with a town like Hewenden and want to go and have a conversation with the other people in Hewenden who have a similar sized town, similar experiences, similar tastes in programming. Oh, here we go. Here's a question from Suzanne Williams for Kerry. As a presenter, are you aware of the demographics/population data relating to your community, and does this influence your programming decisions? For example, if you have a large population of a particular demographic, would you develop particular programs for them specifically?
Yeah, we do. And we don't have... the short answer is yes, we are aware of what some of our demographics are, and some of the communities, but the other side of it, if you look at Toowoomba, there's more than 3,000 refugees have been settled there over the past years, particularly the Sudanese and Somali communities. But they're not engaged with traditional performing arts, like they certainly aren't at the theatre. However, we do work with our projects company that will at least that does some social inclusion and community engagement. And currently, the refugee intake in our city, as far as the people that are at school are really in the Middle Eastern areas now, and we are heavily involved with an English as second language project at one of our high schools. And we, in the other side of it, but our Indigenous activities, we've been working quite hard for the last 3 years on creating a connection, and it's working, of providing an outcome. And we had Bangara this week, actually, well, last week, very successfully, and it does provide those audience outcomes. But it's not just about putting on a show. It's about getting into the community and creating a committee, and which we've done, and we're working with some not just elders but social groups and things like that who are and our council, who are all involved in getting that getting those connections and improving them.
So your relationships with the local council in Toowoomba is quite strong?
It is, although we're because we're a company, we work outside of council, and we're not a council-run theatre. So we have some autonomy, and that can be a good and bad thing sometimes, because while we're seen as successful, sometimes that means they don't talk to us. But they hold the theatre and our operation in high regard. But it does mean that you actually still have to go and knock on doors a few times a year just to make sure that they remember you who you are.
How much of your programming does rely on the touring sort of circuit, Kerry? How much are you finding stuff locally, or commissioning work, or developing local artists?
In the main theatre, it depends on commercial touring and on a fair bit on funded touring. Certainly the larger pieces really do have to be provided by a funded outcome, and in particular our children's program. For our large events, things like our schools-based, primary to year 8, primary to year 5 sort of thing, we can get up to 3,000 people to a popular show, and that's coming off of the schools. But without a cohesive tour, those things aren't possible. Whereas we try and are trying to grow a holiday program for each holidays that we have, where we are investing. There's no question that we're investing in each holidays, but we want to make that a regular ability for our community to be able to go, oh, we know there's something on in town that our children will be able to go and see.
I mean, and because you're separate to council and you're operating probably with your own board, etc., how much capacity do you have to take a loss on productions, as opposed, is that something you're able to do?
Yeah. We have a programming budget within our operating budget, which is a deficit-run programming budget. It's with judicious programming, because the other option is also in the word programming. It's not always about buying shows that will lose, or being involved in shows that will lose money. Our programming budget includes, for instance, the Melbourne Comedy Festival, which generally speaking for us is actually cash positive, so that enables us to do a little bit more work. So our programming, if you like, for a year, our income off our programming budget will be about $400,000. We can, it's not private knowledge. We have an entrepreneurial budget as to part of that of $50,000 in a year. So we're actually enabled to lose, if you like, $50,000 out of our operational budget each year. So that's what we budget for. Only, I think last year is probably the first time in 7 or 8 that we've actually gone below the line. Yeah. And that was about 7. Wow. So it's very judicious, and you've got to, you can certainly get it wrong. Yeah. But you do have to be very wary of making sure, and we're very careful about our future planning to make sure that we do line up with those numbers. Yeah, great. Well, we're sort of probably getting close to the end. Is there any other questions that people want to fire through before we... Oh, Keith, sorry, I missed one from Keith there, so I'll just read this out. Having just finished some solo gigs in Queensland, I'm really keen for my production company to present my credentials for future gigs in 2016 and 2017. What's the best way to go about this? It's just me, my 2 acoustic guitars and a ukulele, so production's not complex. One of the recent gigs was at Gary and Sharon's venue in Caloundra, the event centre. So, what's the best way for Keith to go about getting out on the road in Queensland? if the gig that is not huge, I think the showcase and roadcase are certainly options, and certainly NARPACA. The NARPACA venues do have a list that we send out to each other, a news feed. So they're all options that are available to a producer to be involved with. And I know Suzanne's online, so and she certainly does send some stuff out to all of us when an approach is made.
And I should say too, in addition to that, it doesn't cost you anything to put your show onto the Artour website, Keith, where you can actually collect all of the information that's sort of relevant for presenters to consider, and that's something you can do for free. And if you feel like calling Artour, we can sort of walk you through that process too.
I missed that one off my list, Luke. Sorry, but
There you
I use the Artour website quite regularly to have a look and see what's available.
Yeah, it's a great place to sort of put your video there, photos, images, all sorts of different things. Leslie's also asked, one of my concerns about pitching my show to fit into the perceived audience demand, which has been exacerbated by this conversation, is that programs appear to be decided based on elements other than data about the community's preferences, perhaps even by the preferences of the deciding panel. So lead audiences to events that they don't know they want. Can you talk further on this?
How we lead audiences to events that they don't know they want.
I think that's, if I'm understanding that right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there might not be two questions about whether how the showcase program is curated there as well, perhaps. We try very hard to keep a wide range of audience, but there are some things like contemporary dance that we know what our audience is. It's absolutely abominable. So while we present it, and we present very carefully as to think very hard and carefully as to what we present, it's a very difficult task in audience engagement and in increasing, and we certainly are attempting those things to further the outcomes, because we believe it's still an art form that is needed and desired by a level of our community. I guess if we know our community, saying that we're going to present for something that we're not sure our community wants, but they might like it at the end of it, it's absolutely valuable. But if nobody comes to it, then we didn't achieve anything. So it's about getting that balance.
I think maybe also Leslie's maybe, and Leslie, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but also, how much of the decision making about programming is based on the program manager's personal tastes, and how much of it is data driven or those things? No.
Well, it's absolutely data driven. And within the realms of a wide ranging program, certainly each for our venue, it's not a program manager. We don't have one person who makes those calls. Mm-hmm. We sit down as a group of 5 people and go, okay, what do we see as being of value, and what do we see of not of value, and we also make sure that we don't overload in a particular genre. We don't, for instance, buy a lot of country because that comes through and it's highly successful, and there's not a lot of point in us trying to invest in something that commercially is a viable option.
Okay, I hope that we've covered that question. Okay, Leslie. Gary's has asked for me, will there be consultation with NARPACA venues about the future programming requirements to align with presentations at Showcase? Well, in short, yes, we are hoping to engage with NARPACA and the general membership of NARPACA to really have a clear sense going into Showcase about the programming strategies that people are trying to achieve, and to do some of that groundwork before we get to the event. The program of Showcase is a program that's selected by a panel of presenters from the network. So it's not Artour curating a program for Showcase. It's very much a consultation with the presenters who are involved in decision making at the event. And I think that I'm hoping that we can yeah, we'll probably try to develop some initiatives sort of in the months leading up to Showcase to sort of really see how we can, what groundwork will provide the most rich environment at Showcase to make decisions and consider work. Then Nell's asked Kerry, Nell McQueen from
Yep.
Millmerran. Nell's asked, how successful was everything go as a mini tour? Like
Everything must go. It wasn't financially successful. We learned an enormous amount, and part of that, while not financially successful, is that we put one of our technicians on the road for, I think, 6 weeks for the entire tour anyway, through Queensland, and that was a great learning experience for him as well. So that was for us. That's a business outcome because that didn't really get covered by our costs. We were amazed with some of the outcomes in our own region, and particularly when we went out to Yarraman, which is out on the edge of the Toowoomba region, almost in Burnett Shire. And we expected to get 20 people, and I think 60 came through the door that night and went bring us some more things. We've since had a conversation with our council about whether we should be seen to be doing that, and they are quite on board. So
that's very good.
It does mean that we don't expect to make money at that level, but it's certainly something that we're looking at doing again, probably in October of next year, I think.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that's really exciting. And just to pick up on Craig's comment back to Keith, there's also the National Touring Selector, which is also a space that producers can upload their information about when they're available and all the different sort of technical requirements of their show. There's a number of different rounds that happen throughout the year, which is now an online round. That presenters such as Kerry and others from across Australia actually come together and consider those different works, and there's a voting process to have some clear outcomes about what shows look like they have enough interest to be a viable tour. There's a few different elements. The Artour sits alongside a number of different national tour coordinators, and there's different showcases in different states and different opportunities for presenters to come and see work. So Queensland Touring Showcase is by no means the only place that Queensland venues would be going to look for programming work. And it all sort of, and all those tour coordinators are talking together quite a lot too. So to try and sort of create a sort of as many outcomes for producers as possible.
Think, like if you're programming, I mean, the more open choices these days tend to be a direct approach as a programmer to find the work that you want. You work with the producer representatives that we've talked today, and there's plenty of them around the country, with the arts organisations in each state, which includes the National Touring Selector is an online resource for nationally, and as is Artour ultimately. And all of those spaces provide you an opportunity to talk to the producers, as well as the showcases around the country. And honestly, I found 2 shows this year from the Adelaide Fringe because I decided I'd go and have a look. And I think that's, while neither of those shows are in this year, one of them is in next year, or 2 of them hopefully, depending on our friends at Playing Queensland. But they're the sort of places that as a producer, as a programmer, they're the options that you can look for. And as a producer, they're the places where you want to be putting your stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Well, we have sort of come to the end of our time. So before we sign off, I just wanted to mention for any producers who have joined us this afternoon, next Wednesday we have a touring forum for producers to come along here at the Judith Wright Centre, where Artour is based, and also our friends Flying Arts, who are always great to us and supporting us with these webinars. But it's a face-to-face gathering, so we can actually go through in a little bit more detail about what to expect from Showcase and Roadcase, and to lay some of that groundwork with the producers who are involved, to cover off any touring basics that you're interested in. So that's Wednesday the 28th of October from 1:30 until 5, just for an afternoon. You can register for that event on the Artour website, or feel free to give us a call if you want a little bit more information. Thank you very much, Kerry. I think you've done a great job.
Oh, I hope some
your
of it's
your
been
fellow
useful.
NARPACA people will be very proud of you.
I'm sure they'll tell me later. So showcase is 13, 14,
14, 15 of
14,
March next year.
15 of March. And the
at the
road
Gold Coast.
coasters?
And then road case will be 22nd of March in Toowoomba, the 12th of April in Rockhampton, and the 19th of April in Hughenden. So all those details are on our website as well. Registrations aren't open yet, but we're still in the process of taking shows. So producers are able to submit their shows for that right now. And it's a really easy process. All the details are on our website. So, but if you get stuck, give us a call. Thanks, Paul, and thank you to Flying Arts for today. Thank you, Kerry, again.
Thanks for the support, Gary.
And thanks everyone for throwing out some questions and for being involved in the chat. We'll see you at the next webinar, and details will be in our next e-news. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lee.